here. Okay, great. Well, I hope everyone's doing well. And I know we're 5 sessions in. Maybe this is the sixth, but this is where my real fears kick in for a lot of reasons. It's the Zeno's paradox. Like you have to take one step forward to start somewhere and end somewhere, but each step can be divided. So if you get asymptotic, if you keep on cutting, you're not going to get anywhere, even if you're trying to move from one place to another. I mean, this is like an infinite approach now. How many times can we dissect a section? But I don't think it's going to be possible, at least for the sections of being in time, to do a whole session on one section. We have 83. So you you see how you want to relate to that. Um, having been taught by Derrida and also being immersed in continental philosophy, I guess the grounding in the tradition is different from other traditions of philosophy, certainly analytic. Although they can take pieces of text and small sections and you know develop an infinite kind of complexity with them. But for me, just witnessing his lectures to see that he too he can only do a paragraph of something like being in time. Excuse me, Freud or another piece of text from a literary figure like Blanchot. I think I mentioned that. Like I remember one semester, if you know Blanchot, was a novel, La Folie de Jour. I don't know, 10 pages about a guy who wakes up. I don't even remember it and has a day. But Blanchot is a brilliant literary figure and also a deep thinker who Derrida admired. You could spend an endless amount of time. So that's what's going to happen here. So we're going to slow down on the one hand, and it's going to take longer to try to do something with a piece of text. So today it's only 2 pages of section 5, excuse me, 6, the destruction of the history of ontology. And we'll get into the German translation as well. And then, honestly, in the Derrida text as well, for different reasons, we're going to be slowing down. And I will put my cards on the table and say, once again, I am not an authority of the text. I've spent decades, of course, doing this, but that does not make me a master interpreter. You are. We all can try to see what we can do. Also, it seems to me the texts of the early Heidegger, the lectures and leading up to Being in Time, and then the works up to about 1933, where he has a systematic exposition of certain thinkers, Hegel, Kant, Leibniz, Aristotle, after Being in Time, and then, of course, leading up to it, is different from the later Heidegger on the poetics and technology and language and so many other issues. That he kind of, you can see that he's building this edifice. He's laying the grounds, and he keeps building, 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 and that's how he can run the course. For a lot of reasons, as we'll see in the Derrida work, and therefore the nature of deconstruction itself, it doesn't work that way. I've never seen Derrida in his lectures or in his text, for that matter, systematically building ground upon ground. It's very nonlinear, and it's quite possible that, uh, not that we're trying to emulate him, but we could get lost in one passage or text. We can try to remember the traces of what we read as a whole, retained in our memory. We can try to systematize it. It's not because it's trying to elude systematicity or totality or wholeness of the text. It's just he jumps around. I mean, that's just how his brain works, and yet each problematic or turning of it opens up, a field for him. He would always say questions, research questions, as if he's some social scientist, and people are looking at him like, you're not a social scientist. And the philosophers are saying, you're not a systematic philosopher. But so we're only going to look at really a couple of footnotes in a relatively longer chapter 5, but the footnotes will give us a lot to work with. For those that joining the group, sorry, I'm getting over a cold that I got from my kids. I'd like this group not to be it doesn't presume that we know who these two thinkers are. It does not presume that we read anything by them. I'm not trying to engage in debates about intellectual history. How have they been received? How are they being applied? What are the current debates? It's just a group of people, all of us and our polis here, our community, to come to texts, these two texts, and if we can, impossible, but bring a fresh set of eyes to say, okay, what the heck is happening here? What are we reading? What's going on? And not try to pretend to understand anything like Heidegger's thought or Heidegger's scholarship, or how do we define deconstruction? We can practice it. So it's an action. And that language is very important, quite frankly, for someone like Heidegger, not just this Aristotelian idea of doing things, um, not just the energe or of activity or dunamis, but task, Ausgabe, just looking at that. Mission, duty, task, which is the title of section 6. And then deconstruction, not as a method, it's not formalistic. It's a movement, it's an activity. Um, it's an encounter, it's an engagement, it's a phenomenological reduction, which you'll question, as you'll see here. You can almost see the seeds of his deconstruction or post-structuralist departure from the formal enterprise of phenomenology, because he's going to engage with this problem of language. So, yeah, I'll pause there. It's just we're moving into a space where we may just be focusing. We do our own reading and do what we will with it for our own work, but when we meet, it's reasonable that we can only really look at a couple of. We're now getting to a point where we can only look at a couple of paragraphs, sometimes even a sentence or a footnote. So let me open up the Derrida text first, and then 2 pages of section 6 is all we can possibly, I think, accomplish. Even that will be highly reductive. Okay, so again, this is not a lecture. This is just some kind of framing, and it's hard for me to even do any kind of justice to the whole of this chapter 5 from its beginning. If we had time, we would just start from the beginning and keep moving. But here I'm landing not shortly after the beginning, as you'll see. There begins chapter 5. This possibility, history itself, the previous section, establishes the possibility of its own appearing, and then he names possibility as first called language. He's saying this in the late 50s and 60s. Later, Heidegger has already made the move to language. So is, of course, Wittgenstein much earlier, and then by the investigations. The linguistic term, Austin and the analytic tradition. So it's only natural after structuralism. I said I was going to do intellectual history, but here it is. But language itself, it becomes a question and also part of the reduction, meaning we have to suspend, bracket, epoche means distance ourselves from any psychological subjectivism, any immediate intuitions, any heritage or transmission. We're all born in a language. Any ridiculous idea of immanent, flattened, linear time within timeness, to get into the Heidegger piece. And then even in the moment of speech now, self-same presence, we're simultaneous. I'm speaking English. Those of you that speak English and know it as your first language, or if it's not, then you're getting it in a different way probably. But that too is a type of transcription of a set of traces that is not writing as in a physical text, but to upend the speech and writing, as the later Derrida will do. And there's so many ways to reduce even the phenomenal appearance of the term as a signifier or a signified, their unity, even though that's what language is when we even talk about language. So the famous distinction between speech and discourse. So I'm not going to go into that because it'll come back. We really want to get at the word historicity and history today, because they're not the same, and there are 5 other variations in Heidegger's German, which we have to deal with. But to get to the Derrida and this great footnote 66, in homage to Eugene Fink, early phenomenology figure, student of Husserl. I'm going to read at the bottom here. Therefore, to the very extent that language is not natural, not innate to the human species, so therefore the natural languages of animals or animal intelligence, if you think of it that way. A later Derrida text. The animal, therefore I am, not I think, therefore I am, but the animal opens up with him coming out of the shower, I think, naked, and he sees his cat, and the cat freezes. Gordon, you're in the psychoanalytic realm, you can deal with that. But there's a great deal of anxiety and fear and shame, not because this animal knows the difference between the nakedness and the fall from Genesis, but the trying to imagine the other animal seeing himself seeing this anxiety, which he has to Anyway, you can imagine what Derrida does with this. Point is that sorry Chomsky or early Chomsky, natural proclivity of humans. Language is the house of being, and being is not human either. Neither is Dasein. That's Heidegger. But it paradoxically offers the most dangerous resistance to the phenomenological reduction. And you're going to see why. Like when you reduce something and completely empty out whatever sensory, intuitive, experiential content comes to you when you encounter anything. So it can clear itself out a bit and then allow for you to get to the essential features of that experience of it. The reduction can assume that, at least as he's going to say, Husserl is not going to bother to question the language of the reduction or language in general. He's just going to operate with the reduction on anything, on things. This transcendental discourse will remain irreducibly obliterated by a certain ambiguous worldliness. That's fascinating, because being in the world is important for Heidegger, facticity. By imagining that the origin, Husserl's origin in geometry, will first indicate the possibility of history as the possibility of language, we are calculating how difficult is every attempt to reduce. Because if you reduce something, then you're going to reduce that thing, and reduce meaning if you suspend something, you have to suspend that, delay, defer, so you don't just quickly arrive at something to get at a deeper understanding, not just of the manifestation of the phenomenon, but our relationality. That's very important, which is a part of concern. Remember we talked about responsibility. The ultimate radical transcendental aggression, a phenomenology of phenomenology of historicity. There's Ricoeur, there's some other figure, Merleau-Ponty in the 50s before the Derrida Foucault generation. Time you get to Derrida and Foucault in the 60s, they take it, and other guys too, like this guy Michel Serres, philosopher of science, history of science. Lyotard, Jean-François Lyotard, the other, not as well known, maybe not as invoked, but they were dealing with this. We'll have to bracket that phrase, phenomenon, because don't think of history, don't think of your history classes, don't think of all the historians on CNN telling us how to interpret world events. So I love historians, they're great, but we're not talking to them. We see a certain non-dependence confirmed in that phenomenon. Let's go back to that 66 worldliness. So the dangerous resistance to phenomenological reduction, transcendental discourse, if you can ever have something like that, and Derrida deconstruction is going to question that. Hence the transcendental project of the early Heidegger, which he'll also question. This is a difficult task that Fink has frequently underscored, particularly in his famous article, Kantstudie in 33, Phenomenological Philosophy of Edmund Husserl, Contemporary Criticism. For him, the phenomenological reduction cannot be presented by means of any simple sentences of a natural attitude. Well, that's too bad. When we're talking about the reduction itself, don't just, hey, it's this or this, that. Analytics, when their commitment to clarity and transparency and knowing what we're talking about when we're talking about it, even if we want to question that very act, speech act, it can be spoken of only by transforming the natural function of language. And then, in his admirable lecture on Les Concepts, dans la phénoménologie des Husserl, by broken French, he attributes a certain equivocation in the usage of operative concepts, that of constitution. Constitution also, we had some problems with that. Not the US Constitution, not our biological constitution. install, constitute, put together, anatomical constitution. Husserl does not pose the problem of a transcendental language. He doesn't do that. He wonders if after the reduction, one can still have at his disposal a logos in the same sense as before. So no pre-existent idea of knowing or truth. Similarly, concerning the expression intentional life, Suzanne Bachelard evokes the danger of a surreptitious return to psychologism. The deconstruction of phenomenology is, look, Husserl, you did this great breakthrough, but now there's a residue you're bringing back because you can't work through it. Things that we still have to question, like even the signifier in an intentional life, logos, the reduction itself. The language does not know the phenomenological reduction, and so holds us in the natural attitude. Okay, here's where it gets very interesting. And then we can look at another paragraph. I really apologize. It's going to be a broken recording. On the basis of the problems in the origin, we can thus go on to ask ourselves, for example, what is the hidden sense? The non-thematic and dogmatically received sense of the word history or of the word origin, a sense which is a common focus of these significations, permit us to distinguish between factual history and intentional history. So he doesn't change the words history there. There are two different ways they're being used, factual, intentional. Origin, like we normally think of it. Birth certificate, start of a new day, chronological time, date, day, in the ordinary sense, and phenomenological order, very complicated problem. And so, what is this unitary ground starting from which this diffraction of sense is permitted and intelligible? How is the diffraction, distinction, differentiation even occurring? Now, these are profound ontological questions. They look very traditional. What is history? Let's do the philosophy of history. Ask, okay, philosophers of history, what is history? Plenty to say about that, as will Heidegger. What is the origin? About which we can say that we must understand them sometimes in one sense, sometimes in another. So long as the notion of origin in general is not criticized, here we go, Deconstruction 101. The radical vocation is always threatened by this mythology of the absolute beginning, and so remarkably denounced by Feuerbach in his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy. Interesting, going back to Feuerbach. Very important for Marx, by the way. These questions can show the need for a certain renewed and rigorous philological or etymological thematic which would precede the discourse phenomenology. Those of you that know some Derrida, the great breakthroughs in the 60s, Foucault in his own way, who Derrida will very early on critique, but for sure, structuralism, phenomenology, Sartrean existentialism, structuralist Marxism, existential Marxism, psychoanalysis, they're all out there. Hegel, through at least Hippolyte. But phenomenology, for sure, that this weird text called phenomenology is itself concealing something else that's not even being discussed. A formidable task because it supposes that all the problems which it would have to precede are resolved. In particular, as a matter of fact, the interlocutory problem of history and that of the possibility of historical philology. So he's not talking about historicism. He doesn't name Nietzsche's genealogy as a critique of traditional ways of thinking about history. In any case, this task never seems to have appeared urgent to Husserl, even when the idea of linguistic reactivation, that sounds like an event, but not in the subject, and not an event in the world, takes on so much importance for him. Unlike Heidegger, so whatever Heidegger he got by 1960, and as you know, there wasn't a full translation of Being in Time, and this is still the 50s and early 60s when Derrida is young. The translations of the later Heidegger hadn't appeared either, but Heidegger was working, thinking that. It does not determine but follows the orientation of the investigation. For Husserl, it would be absurd for sense not to proceed de jure by law, maybe not a priori, but the whole point is the deduction from something that you're trying to get to. Here, de jure is difficult to make clear. The act of language itself is not being questioned, certainly not transvaluated. Will always be that of expression. Very important going back to the logical investigations. How does sense and therefore nonsense be avoided? Not to pursue the scientific work, the work of science. That's not what they're talking about. It's deeper than that in the sense that you're trying to raise the question of, you know, the sense of science itself to be what it is, the origin of geometry, the free ideality that can float, even though you can repeat it over and over to get to that same breakthrough. But once it's there, it's out there. It breaks into history and it's out there. And yet we can reduce that structure and its temporality to question it's not a simple story of some genius coming up with geometric truth. Okay, the other main footnote I want to get to is 69. And what is 69 referring to? By now, he's going to question the nature of language in a profound way, as you know. It's not linguistics or the study of the science of language. And of course, he's questioning phenomenology's blind spots to not understand its own trappings because it didn't put language into question. And if you try to reduce that, you're going to go mad because you're using language to do that. But the real target here, and this is what I'll depart to Heidegger, is this problem of historicity, is not being history, or being in history, or the historical present, or whoever in their authoritarian fashion, our media, or the president of the US, whoever's running anything, tells us this is history. And you must have this patriotic view of your history. So we're not concerned about history, but historicity. We'll have to clarify that distinction. Okay, so if we're going to get into this mystery of language, we're going to free it from all factual linguistic subjectivity. We're going to use the example of Löwe and the lion in German. And just to bracket once again, simple Saussurean linguistics, signifier, speech, or written word, signified object or mental image. In English, I say cat, and then the image of what I've been told from the time I was a kid, because you can say it in a billion different ways, languages. That particular animal, not a giraffe, not an elephant. The correlation between them is a unity called a sign. And then it's interminable because you can create new signs and associations and differentiate them at that level. But the mystery is, how does this unity occur? And how do we reduce that? It's not a question of watching a child emerge into language, but the kind of contingencies involved in this process. That's that. What's happening here? So don't think of signified object. It's neither expression nor the sense content. Well, what the heck is it? The flesh and blood lion, intended through two strata of idealities, is natural and therefore contingent reality. As a perception of the immediately present sensible thing grounds idealities under those circumstances, so the contingency of the lion is going to be reverberate in the ideality of the expression and in that of its sense. Okay, Magelbeck. The translatability of the word lion then will not in principle be absolute and universal. It's not just a transmission and translation that takes place of the term across it. Is it the signified signifier unity or relation, or the contingency of that? Because it's weird. There's no way to utter. I mean, hypothetically, I can just, without knowing every language in the world, because obviously I don't, no one does. But let's say I start to murmur some things, and then I came up with my own script, and I decided to create my own language. I can, in principle, associate some murmuring, blah, 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 and then come up with some graphic inscriptions, and then start creating my letters and combine them into words, etc., into sentences. So it's if you think about that and you say, well, hey, what is that the origin of every language? That's, kind of scary to think that it really is nothing. So to reduce that sense content or the immediate sensibility of being in language itself as a subject, it will be empirically conditioned by the contingent encounter and the perceptive intuition of something like the line. The latter is not an objectivity of understanding, but an object of receptivity. See, and he's gonna question this now here as well. So to go back to that, if you want to, and I'm actually, I think, doing some damage here. I'm doing some simplistic reduction. Natural objectivity and scientific objectivity are, of course, not the same. But if you want to say objectivity as in objects, we name them, we discover them, we operate in the language, we operate in paradigms, like Kuhn would say, we engage in research within a field, and we don't have time, as philosophers do, to sit there and question the presuppositions of everything we're doing. And then we go after these objects. In the chapter, there's an earlier distinction that makes the geometric truth and the problem of it appeared, we're on this side, where the sense has already been formed, and then we have the ability to repeat the intuitions and the proof. And like a kid, when you get that aha moment of the Pythagorean theorem, you teach the kid, oh, wow, that really works. Oh, it's indisputable. I can't move anything around. The equal sign is there, and that's it. It's already set. So it's repeatable, but it's free because it's timeless. Yet it emerged. And yet all these things are being reduced linguistically because I don't want to associate meanings to any of those terms. The thing has an origin, the thing itself, what the hell is it? It's ideal because it's supposed to have that abstract idea of sense. But of course, we can produce our theorems and write it down and look at it. So the free ideality is the problem here, as opposed to things that don't emerge, I guess, and it always is. And I don't know what anything would be in the universe that always is, unless you want to have your pre-Big Bang, or if you're religious, you have your pre-existent God before the creation of everything, and God exists and all is all being. Go down that route if you want. But two types of objectivity, which comes back to the difference between the ideal objectivity and real object in experience and judgment. The objectivities of understanding are on a higher level than those of receptivity. They're not pre-constituted, wow, like the latter in the pure passivity of sensible receptivity, but in predicative spontaneity. What the heck is the predicative spontaneity for the ideal objectivities or transcendental that are there and exist at a higher level than real objects that everyone else studies, ontic objects, being as entities, for example, in Heidegger, all the sciences, everything, traditional philosophy, theology, natural sciences, social sciences, going after their objects without questioning them. The mode of their original pre-givenness is the production, producing in the predicative activity ego. Some like Derrida and a lot of post-phenomenologists don't like that word ego. But that too has to be reduced. Lacan did it, Foucault and Derrida for sure, Deleuze, all the nobody wants a subject or ego that we just assume exists. But let's be honest, Heidegger did that before. Maybe even Hegel, but certainly Heidegger and Nietzsche. Another difference, and this is where we're going to transition, that of their temporality. Transcendental historicity, temporality, the birth of something eternal and repeatable as a tradition, as a logos, as our heritage, as our language, is what we unconsciously or consciously are forced to be obedient towards. Otherwise, we'll be institutionalized. If you ask Foucault, we don't speak sensibly. So that's what Derrida and deconstruction try to get at. Not that he's not a terrorist who wants to blow up everything. And I'm sure people accuse him of that. It's the most radical form of questioning. You can reduce even something like the temporality of the phenomenological enterprise. The real object has its individual place in the objective time of the world. Again, It's simplistic, but whatever you want to call a real object. The line's a line. I'm not going to worry about translation of it into other terms or out of rows, or if in fact that's what I'm looking at. What if it's something else? Or the cat staring at the naked Derrida. It's not the real world of things. The irreal object is, with respect to the latter, totally free. See, this is wild. Freedom, timelessness, he calls it free ideality from Husserl. But look at these terms. It's timelessness, Zeitlosigkeit, supratemporality, Überzeitlichkeit, is only a mode of temporality. Omnitemporality, Allzeitlichkeit. Now, Heidegger is going to come along, early Heidegger, and you're going to see it now, because it starts with this section 6, is going to take up these modes and flip them on their head. He's going to take us from the timeless, which he would say is a form of temporalism, as is eternity, not just the eternal present or the now, but religious conceptions, and take us into this primordial temporalizing of our own finitude, which is not just dying as human beings or having a birth date and a death date. So that's pretty awesome. He's getting the modes, getting the phenomenological inspiration, shifting it. So, but he, according to Derrida here, at least Husserl is concerned about it. But these terms themselves don't just equate them as what you might even think, because they have to do with reactivation, recurrence, and repetition. And yet they didn't have an origin, because that leads us to certain paradoxes. Like the yolk of the egg of the geometric truth is already prepackaged, and all the sediments that had to be there, if it congealed in some kind of intuitive spark. The chicken is in the yolk, right? It's going to appear later, but we're not talking about that. So these are very bizarre terms if we try to reduce them. And then here's the weird thing, link them up to this problem of a transcendental historicity. And he says that here as he's concluding the chapter. The space for a transcendental historicity is prescribed in all its enigmatic depth. So now we got a pivot, and this is going to be a sharp pivot, as you'll see. If I stop sharing. Lo and behold, we're 6 sections in, and Heidegger, this is why analytics or Anglo-American folks don't like him, because he's already going to be throwing a lot of new words at us, and yet the attempt to even define them doesn't show up much later. That's not how you teach, I guess, or write, historicality, historizing, which the English translators, Macquarie Robinson, are going to do their best to try to differentiate them. I do have the full-blown section 72 where the definitions of these things kick in. And what's effed up about Heidegger is that what he's talking about here, and these words here, is not what he's talking about when he uses those very same words for something entirely different. So being in time is either like 2 books or 3 books or 5 books or 6 separate books in a book. There's no serious process of deduction. Kant, give it up to him. Authentic guy that doesn't lie, who's honest with himself by the end. Hegel, leave him alone for a second. Marx comes out swinging right out of the gates. We know what that guy's about. He's very angry. He wants to start something. He wants to, destroy something. But don't think about any of those guys. And even we have to get to the German Destruction. So we're going to try to clarify Derrida's problem of historicity is lodged between phenomenology not entering into the questioning of language itself, but still this radical critique of all senses of history and the origin, which he thinks is buried in Husserl, and phenomenology, not because it's going after the timeless, but itself is not reflective about its own, the problem of the reduction. because you can keep on reducing. And yet you're going to feel sick after a while because at some point you're going to have to land on some sense that made you question the origin of some sense, of something. It's that pre-givenness, you know? Now try to do that to yourself. I want to carve away my name, my parents, my birth date, if I know all those things, where I was born and raised. Keep clearing those empirical facts out to get at the facticity of what I really am and my radical individuation. You all do that. This is Heideggerian, and it's irreplaceable. And we're going to have to do it because we can't take each other's debt. And we're not going to live to tell if we believe in this finitude. And for some reason, the mystery is not our own mortality or finitude or biological perishing, but is a problem of time itself. And you'll see that he's already announced that the being of Dasein is going to be, the meaning of it anyway, is temporality. Dasein is that being that's going to pose the question, is the inquirer. The project is to try to understand the meaning of being, ontology, but it's not going to offer itself. And forget about metaphysics and all their answers. Time again is a version of that. Problem of that circle. Dasein, temporality. Time is a version of understanding being, their relationship. Not a circle of subject-object. And now these terms. So what does he say here? All research, and not least that which operates within the range of the central question of being, is an ontical possibility of Dasein. So he's dismissing, not dismissing, but he's saying, look, there are ontic investigations into being, social science, natural science, theology, there's anthropology, and that's one of the ontical possibilities of Dasein too, to do those things. But that's not fundamental ontology. Rather, Dasein's being finds its meaning in temporality. That's restated. But temporality is also the condition which makes historicality possible as a temporal kind of being which Dasein itself possesses, regardless of whether and or how Dasein is an entity in time. Historicality as a determinate character is prior to what is called history. So we got to go already into this issue of the German translation here, because there's a lot that, if you know the work of being in time, and definitely Division 2, Section 72, which I spent a lot of time in, there's a lot already to be said here about all the distinctions that can be made. But let's first start with the translators, in fairness to them. Weltgeschichtlich geschehen, world historical happening, is world historical historizing going on there. Geschehen, happening, occurrence. See, the verb geschehen ordinarily means to happen. The concert is happening. Something almost happened this weekend if you watch the news. Didn't happen. World, not this weekend, no, a few days ago, whatever it was. Well, so to happen, and will often be so translated. Heidegger stresses its etymological kinship to Geschichte, or history. Division 272, destiny, the Vogue, specter of the Nazi question that a lot of scholarship focuses on. We're not there, but Geschick, Schicken, sending, Geschick, destiny, Geschichte, history, as in like formal recorded history, valorized, sovereign history, but not history with an H. They also have that too with an IE. My history, story, narrative. So we're not even bringing all those others in, but it's just Geschichte, geschehen. So they coined this verb historize, which might be paraphrased as to happen in an historical way, which usually translate geschehen this way in context where history is being discussed. Ancient history, the Roman Empire. We trust that the reader will keep in mind that such historizing is characteristic of all historical entities, And it's not the sort of thing that is done primarily by historians, as philosophizing, for instance, is done by philosophers. So let me just come back here, keeping all that in mind. Don't put Dasein in time, therefore don't put it in historical time. Don't put it in the historical present. Don't put it in us, the agony that I think a lot of us are living through, because you can see how effed up the world is. And all these crazy people at the top making decisions, putting us at the brink of some kind of deferral of the actual collapse of the world, but it's acceleration paradoxically because they don't know what they're doing, and they're all a bunch of authoritarian tyrants who are crazy. All of them. I don't want to name names here. You pick and choose your who upsets you the most. I know what I'm afraid of and what I don't know. So this totalitarianism of history, to come back to some Iran, the fact that we're forced to live in this stupid current moment as opposed to some other time, or our historical reception, whether we want to neutralize our historical subjectivity and have some fascination about some previous time and be mystified by the ancient Greeks or whatever, ancient Egyptians or some archaeological event and oh, the lost ark, where is it? Lost covenant, Shroud of Turin, Jesus. Well, oh yeah, they found. Okay, then something occurrence happens, get activated. The effective history, Gadamer, the past and present horizons having a conversation with each other, but they're supposed to be distinct, which is the now point in the sequence, and that's the problem. The relationality, but the activation of sense. So it's not that. It's not the history that we are telling ourselves, or the history we're living through. It's not the hermeneutic circle. We're made by history and we make it. It's not freedom and necessity. It's not the problem of revolution. Both how do we have one, but also when they occur, how do we understand how they started? So you can bracket all those senses. So historicality, as we'll get to, Geschichtlichkeit is not historicism, the act of being historical, historicist. In English, we say historiography. Be curious to know what you guys say in other languages. Well, what we mean by that is the history of changing interpretations of a historical event. There are paradigms of, let's say, in the Anglo-American world of World War II. Each decade since 50, 60 may prioritize different paradigmatic structures in which historians work to try to explain the causes, the structural nature of it, the decentralizing of the figure of Hitler. So you don't give him too much credit because he was insane, as we know, and evil, but the structural forces that made it possible. To maybe the class argument. No. What is the classist, maybe perhaps Marxist interpretation? To other formations, the nature of fascism and ideology, the racialization of the 20th century, the history of the historical interpretations. That's not historiography. And this is very bizarre, but it's definitely not, like I said, the immediate assumption that you're living through something historical. Because you can always say that. End of the Cold War, 9/11. Look what's happening now. I don't want to name Bozo at the top, but the arc we've been living through the world in the United States from 2017 to 24 of radical disruption of norms and actions being taken. Rather, historicality stands for the state of being that is constitutive for Dasein's historizing, eventing, occurring. It's going to turn out to be movement. As such, only on the basis of such historizing is anything like world history possible, or anything like belonging historically to world history. Being in history, the within timeness, oh, it's 918, I'm within time now. I'm a certain age. Heidegger's going to question the origin of that, but not origin because he's not going to be able to get to it. Genesis is another way, but the ground, but how does something like that even emerge? So therefore, also being in history, within history or world history. In its factical being, any Dasein is as it already was, and it is what it already was. It is its past, whether explicitly or not. Now, he hasn't gotten into the problem of temporality here, ecstatic temporality, or engaging Aristotle on the time problems. Because you can't have a non-existent thing also still be, but you have to have it be separate so you can even clarify the now. You have to start from the now and have it die so that other thing can exist, but it doesn't exist because it's dead. All the aporias and paradoxes are going to come back. And he's not clarifying that here. You do what you want with it. Is it the accumulation of everything you have from your birth to now that's still with you and you are? Maybe. Is it the intentional will to be the past? Not because you're embracing it, or perhaps you're a product of trauma or a product of trauma. It's not just the accumulation of time, chronological time, to say how old you are. And then how do you plot that into all the different things that were happening in society and history? It's the being of it, which is the ontological problem. But then that raises a temporal problem because you can't assume either linear time, sequence of passing now points and rising now points. Definitely not calendar or clock time. But look, and this is so not only in that its past is as if it were pushing itself along behind it, and that Dasein possesses what is past as a property which is still present at hand, which sometimes has after effects upon it. Nope. So he wants to get away from that. Determinism, fatalism, guilt, trauma at the individual level, historical level too. Whatever. We're stuck in this Western Eurocentric, those of us in the West, as he says in Gravitology, Derrida, racist, phallocentric, logocentric thing that has made us forget the question of being for Heidegger. We want to transvaluate it, as Nietzsche would say. Passage to some other beginning, if we could ever get there, but we can't because we're dead and we've lost faith in everything that we created. Look at the world. Look at the West today. But it's still pushing us behind us. It's affecting us. No, Dasein is its past. It's in the way of its own being, which is, to put it roughly, historizes. We're going to have to get to this verb. Happens out of its future on each occasion. A lot of folks want to say, oh, the more I anticipate and dread something, it's reactivating the traumatic event, even if it's something anticipated. Like I've never gotten my ears pierced. Let's say I want to do that. Or better yet, my nose pierced. So I'm anticipating it. I know I've seen other people do it, but I've never gone through it myself. And so to be able to even have that sense of not going through others, but genuinely approach that event, you know, and it's not like what will it have been, my anxiety after it's done, and I can look back and say, oh, it wasn't that painful, or wow, that's I wish I didn't do that, or oh wow, I'm so happy I did that. Is he talking about that? Well, that's still an ontic register, so we got to bracket all those ideas. Don't, in other words, as much as you may want to, there's always an inclination to say the preparation of how you're going to think about what will have happened will only happen after you get to that future. It occurs, and then your past will then be formed out of it. The other classic example is like, egologically, for the protection of the ego and its fragility, as we think about if we have that occasional moment of thinking about our own death and not being in the world, Heideggerian problems, one form of solace is to think, oh, what will people think of me after I die? What are they going to say at my funeral? Hopefully they'll say some nice things, or they'll remember me, and is that the past historizing into the future? It's uncanny, but no, it's not that either. Whatever the way of being it may have at the time, and thus with whatever understanding of being it may possess, Dasein has grown up both into and in a traditional way of interpreting itself. In terms of this, it understands itself proximately and within a certain range constantly. By this understanding, the possibility of its being are disclosed and regulating. its own past, and this always means the past of its generation, is not something for which follows along after Dasein, but something which already goes ahead of it. What the heck is going on here? I'm tempted to go to the basic definitions in section 72, chapter 5. But if you don't want to take the individual Dasein and assume that you're determined by a birth, all the things that have happened to you, and that'll affect everything to come, believe in some simplistic idea of fate without temporalizing what that is. Why do some accidents happen to some people, not others? And don't reduce past to something present at hand when you say you're your past. It's coming along, but how's it going ahead of yourself? How's it something that we come to in our anxiety as an authentic way to relate to it? Because that's the problem with Dasein's ecstatic temporality, as you see. Past as in past generations, I think, of being a part of one. We, at least in the US, obsessed with distinctions of generations. Is it by decades? Is it by 2 decades? They seem to shrink. Sometimes it's 25 years, sometimes it's 15 years. Generation X, births from 1960 to 80, millennials 80 to 97, Z 97, 2012. Now Alpha. Alpha is closing probably by 2030, so it'll be Beta is going to come after them. All these coexistent generations. And people are obsessed by this. Well, no, there are no generations. There are no changes in values and language and politics and questions of sustainability and responsibility and debt and transmission. Those things don't exist. We're all just one human being, and we always are going to be one thing. Okay, you can say that, or you can lapse into generations, but both of those are haunting. Something else is going on. The elemental historicality of Dasein may remain hidden from Dasein itself. But there is a way by which it can be discovered and given proper attention. You might think he's just talking about the Western tradition. We can't make up a new Western tradition, whether it's Derrida's closure or what Heidegger said. The Greeks, Plato with a P, not some other guy with another name, Aristotle, and then what's important, at least for being a type, Kant and Hegel, those guys came along, not to valorize them, effects of history, occur to those human beings. Who cares about them? Let's look at the text. And, we're not just going to do this out of nothing. On the other hand, this is not something that's behind us that has an after effect. Individual Dasein is one thing, but now we're getting into historicality. Look at all these other words here. I'm going to get into them in a second. Historicality of Dasein may remain hidden from Dasein itself, but there's a way by which it can be discovered and given proper attention. Dasein can discover tradition, preserve it, and study it. Okay. The discovery of tradition and the disclosure of what it transmits and how this is transmitted, event, movement, sending, or even light is transmitted, can be taken hold of, appropriated, get a hold of as a task in its own right. So why is he going to introduce this destruction, which is not like smashing, a plate on the ground? It's not that. You'll see desedimentizing, unconcealing what's been concealed in these things that are there that we're going to appropriate and make our own out of a certain necessity, which is, again, not the historical determination of what people are telling us. I'm using this contrast. World leaders, their policymakers, their spokespeople are telling us, the Heritage Foundation for Trump, this is how society is going to be, and screw everybody else. And then that becomes the basis of history. Or post-Cold War, New American Empire, the West and the rest. The Great Replacement Theory here in the US, the diminishment of non-Latino whiteness. Oh no, we're getting replaced. I'm not that, but that's white nationalism is operating by this paradigmatic need to shape the historical present. That's not what's happening here. In this way, Dasein brings itself into the kind of being which consists in historiological inquiry and research, but historiology, or more precisely historicity, historicitate, is possible as a kind of being which the inquiring Dasein may possess only because historicality is determining is a determining characteristic for Dasein in the very being basis of its being. So I'm going to have to now do some definitions. If this historicality remains hidden from Dasein, concealed in the Dasein, just like the tradition we're stuck in has these concealments, it's bearing, we're going to crack it open, pull out the possibilities we need to pull out to authentically pose this question of meaning of being. As long as it so remains, as long as Dasein is, it's never present, but it's incomplete. Death will complete it, but you can't know what that is or live to tell what it is. Everyone else can tell you what that is. And you can follow them, religion, anthropology, sociology, psychology, doctors, but that's not fundamental ontology. This story remains hidden is also denied the possibility of storylogical inquiry or the discovery of history. If storyology is wanting, this is not evidence against Dasein's historicality. On the contrary, as a deficient mode of this state of being, is evidence for it. Only because it is historical can an error be unhistorological. So going back to these terms, again, for English, historiography is either the history of the historical interpretations of some great event or thinker or philosophy, the history of the history of interpretations of Aristotle, for example. The Middle Ages have their version, the pre-modern, and then we have ours. And that's historiography. Historiological, the nature of history as a science or a field. Historicity, the quality of being historical, as in, I guess, not adverb is adjective is historical adverb, the quality of possessing. I don't know what it is, but historicity, as opposed to the noun or the subject history. That all is presupposing something else. The historicality built into the Dasein, but that's concealed from Dasein. So you might say, is Dasein, wow, being towards death, bentological, or is it going to have to desedimentize itself? Those of you that do the psychoanalysis, working through people, got to work through all that conscious, unconscious attestations to get it something deeper that's troubling them. Is that like an analogy? But he's talking about the history of the question, the meaning of being in the West. What? So is this deficient mode a bad thing? No. As you'll see, I'm going to end here without even being able to get to destruction. But let's go to that footnote 1. Defense sentier modus. Heidegger likes to think of certain characteristics as occurring in various ways or modes, the modes of temporalizing phenomenology, among which may be included certain ways of not occurring. That's just as important when something doesn't occur. Occurring only to an inadequate extent. I wanted more. Not occurring in a deficient way. What is this? Zero and the negative integers were to be thought of as representing deficient modes of being a positive integer. Just two I got to get to, and then I'm going to pause. Before I completely pivot, then I'll close to the definition of historizing and historicality. But let's work through these definitions here. Unfortunately, we can't use history as in what we learn in school. Now we're getting into the nuances of historiological nature of research. Ricoeur said every philosophy presupposes a philosophy of history, whether it wants to admit it or not. And that's kind of what Derrida sees in Husserl, later Husserl. But let's give Hegel. Obviously, there's an ontological problem of history in his system, in the phenomenology. Why the heck would he go through all these different shapes? Why does he mention it at the end? At least the nature and history, space and time, as one last out haven. And of course, the guy lived in a various, as his friends, Rosaline shown, one of those cataclysmic moments in human history, modern Western history, with the French Revolution and German idealism. So let's bracket all these terms here. We're going to have to get to this historicality. So what's going on? This sounds very bad. We're not going to be able to, it's historicality of Dasein, its very being, and it's not in history and in time. The meaning of being of Dasein is temporality, time's horizon, understanding being. But, so how do we have a chance of even saying anything? On the other hand, if Dasein has seized upon its latent possibility, not only of making its own existence transparent to itself, but also of inquiring into the meaning of existentiality itself, that is to say, of previously inquiring the meaning of being. He's not happy with his historical present. Phenomenology, the neo-Kantians, the theologians, whoever's doing whatever. Great scientific breakthroughs for sure, Einstein, and then quantum mechanics, a lot of stuff happening. And he's like, I don't know. If the individual Dasein is not happy in itself to have simple answers for what it is, then certainly you're not going to be happy with your historical present. I'm not happy with this historical present. I wish I didn't live in this time, honestly. It's just I can't even keep up with it. It's too insane for me. And I'm not asking to be diagnosed, but you think about your how depraved the current situation is. So in a way, he's thinking in terms of the deficiency of the modes to be able to inquire. We've got to overcome this somehow. Nietzsche did his part. He critiqued everything. And then, well, so what? He's the last metaphysician. Now, it's not just a new concept of metaphysics, but how do we think now about that collapse, as you'll see? The meaning of existential inquiring into the meaning of being in general, and if by such inquiry its eyes have been opened to its own essential historicality, then one cannot fail to see that the inquiry into being, the ontico-ontological necessity of which we've already indicated, Dasein is ontical, but it's not present at hand, because what makes it unique, unlike anything else that's ontic, present to hand, ready to hand, things in the world, objects, real objects in the world in space and time, not that transcendental historicity or free ideality, to go back to Derrida. The ontological difference, don't reduce being to beings, don't make it something transcendental like the history of metaphysics or God. Now he's like, okay, he's really saying, okay, I'm going to give us something. Is itself inquired, characterized by historicality. Almost meaning of being which belongs to the inquiry into being, the heck, as an historical inquiry, gives us the assignment. The title of this section is Ausgabe, task, mission, duty, also like assignment. Here they're saying Anweisung, of inquiring into the history of that inquiry itself and working out the question of being. So not just receiving it and studying it. Oh, Aristotle posed it this way, and this is how he answered, and he's responding to Plato, and Plato's forms is doing it to the pre-Socratic, and then comes Aquinas, he's going to merge it. No, that's not that. Do a history, so inquiring into the history of the inquiry and working out the question of being. We must heed this assignment by positively making that past our own. We may bring ourselves into the full possession of the ownmost possibilities of inquiry. The question of the meaning of being must be carried through by explicating Dasein beforehand in its temporality and historicality. Okay, so just trying to be mindful of time here. If you can indulge me, so we can just do some more bracketing. It's not simply stating we're stuck with this tradition. We can't replace Aristotle, Plato, Kant. Okay, there's a way to deal with it. As opposed to going to some other planet and meeting a bunch of other people or aliens or other beings, and they got their own figures and histories and go do what they're doing. That's not happening. It's not a question of delimiting or being trapped or determined. There's a problem of freedom here, as you'll see, and appropriation, and taking over and making one's own. But there's a necessity, and he hasn't articulated this. Definitely not to the satisfaction of any analytic philosopher. But the logical necessity hasn't been made clear here as to why we got to do this. So how do we take this and understand within the framework of being in time? Because it's going to turn out, with the exception of a couple of sections in the whole work, you're not going to get more about this. Yeah, you're going to get references to different historical figures. And he's doing philosophy. He's not doing the history of fire trucks or airplanes. Although there's a funny moment in the Derrida text, the linguistic statement before airplanes were invented, the car is the fastest thing that moves. So that there is a timelessness to it at the moment, but then it gives way to obviously something else. But the recurrence and the re-inhabitation of what it was like to be in that time to state that was the case at one point, but no longer. The temporalization of that is interesting. But we're not dealing with airplanes and cars. We're dealing with the history of the question, the meaning of being. Let's look at so we can just throw ourselves into the deep end. That's the only way. Transcendental historicity is not developed according to Derrida in his engagement with Husserl, because the question of language isn't being raised, and questioning the reduction itself is potentially infinitely progressive. Questioning the origin of some self-same presence. You may not like this, but I told you you were never born. What? Now, to give you a concrete example that hits it home for me is those of us that maybe want to defend, for example, trans rights against everyone who wants to take away trans rights today, conservative movements. To take seriously dysphoria as a questioning of the biological origin, but to have it be a material temporal process that you can appropriate for yourself, to be in the world and to come into the world, but through a distinction that's erased. I mean, there's so much that we can do in trans studies, for example, not to speak on behalf of or for, not coming from within that community, but you can even push it pretty radically if you wanted to, not just because of the politics of it, but for the metaphysical nature of the origin. And that's what's happening here. I don't know if you can see this, section 5. I can't open up how the whole chapter starts and the whole section, but needless to say, he's cruising along. He's finished with death. Oh, that's and care. That's the Zorga. That's the being a done, not anxiety, not guilt, not conscience, not being called into something, not having some resolve. Zorga, whatever that is, care. No, and care. Unfortunately, you might think it's like I care about, getting to work on time. I care about taking my medicine, consciously or unconsciously. Care is being towards death. Death is the greatest possibility for Dasein to be. It's the possibility of no longer being in the world. But don't imagine that spatially is like one of my friends going to say at my funeral, because I'm still bringing that to my present. I haven't gone through it. I'm going to get lifted out of the experience as I transition to it. I'm not going to come back from it. Near-death experience. Oh, yeah, I came back and I saw light. That's not finitude. That's just an extension of yourself, quite frankly, because the person's still alive. Or you can go to religion. Hey, there's an afterlife, and what did Nietzsche say about Peter from the Gospels? Who would want to spend an eternity with Peter? Kind of bungled his way through. Poor Jesus, he had to deal with that guy. So that's not how we put finitude in time and close out birth and death. So he's done birth and death, and he's like, I haven't even attended. Is this whole inquiry? Have I even gotten to the possibility of grasping the whole? No. Gave you the temporality, gave you the resolve, gave you death, but I forgot being towards birth. And that's exactly what he says up here. Although up till now, we've seen no possibility of more radical approach to the analytic. This is being in time. This is where kind of the beginning of the end of the work. It's going to collapse. If we have regard for the preceding discussion of the ontological meaning of everydayness, difficult consideration comes to light. Have we indeed brought the whole of Dasein as regards its authentically being a whole in the forehaving of our existential analysis? Question of meaning of being, the whole nature of that question, the whole meaning of it. Are we even remotely there? We're going to use Dasein, talk about its analytic, to be able to pose that question. But now, just within the Dasein analytic, haven't we just gotten one half, being towards death? Always as if we're going this way in time towards it? No, the past is dead. You can't do anything about it. Well, of course, but he's also not, doesn't mean that. I'm my past too, remember? That first definition. It may be that a formulation of the question as related to Dasein's totality possesses a genuinely unequivocal character ontologically. Derrida might come along and say, yeah, undecidable, unequivocal. You may not be able to get to the, the other than the origin, which doesn't risk becoming kind of like an origin or present, any signified that you want to land on. Well, what if that's just another signifier? You can keep on deferring and delaying. We're caught in those traces that are not present or absent. Problem of writing. It may be that as regards being towards the end, the question of itself may have found its answer. Yes, a lot of Heidegger folks, there you go. By the way, what the heck else do you want to talk about? The one thing you still have to do is die. You're not going to be born again. Religious overtones notwithstanding. But the death is only the end of Dasein, and taken formally is just one of the ends. What? By which Dasein's totality is closed round. The other end, however, is the beginning, the birth. Only that entity which is between birth and death presents the whole which we've been seeking. Wow. The between, later on, he'll say, both those ends are included in the being. They're not the no longer past, yet to be future. No longer, I'm not just constantly being born, coming out of my mother's womb. I haven't died yet. Those entities are also in this ground being. And then what really will become his definition of historizing is this issue of how is Dasein stretched between the two ends, stretching itself and moving as an event in its fundamental complexity, not just towards death, towards birth. So where do we get that definition? Come back to here. All right. The unity of birth and death are connected in a manner characteristic of Dasein. As Dasein is the between, the being of how both are connected and the between. What the hell? Are you literally saying chirologically, as in kairos, the Greek weirdness of that, of I got my birth, here I am now, there's my death. Am I going to go up into like some hot air balloon and have some vantage point to see this indefinite continuation of the stretch, but also have the vantage point, which I don't have right now, to see the birth and the death? That's ontic. That's spatializing. And let's try to get into this ontological depth here. In temporality, however, the constituent totality of care has a possible basis for unity. And within the horizon of Dasein's temporal constitution, that ecstatic temporality, coming towards having been coming out of the future is in the process of having been, that's how I can make myself, this inquire about the meaning of being, present. So I'm not just doing what everybody else is doing, or forced to think about it because someone's telling me this is the answer. That's the freedom and the anxiety. The horizon of Dasein's temporal constitution, that we must approach the ontological clarification of the connectedness of life, stretching along the movement, the persistence. Oh, look at those three terms. Now here's the big key distinction. Static temporality is not linear time, clock time, or calendar time. It's not the spatialization of time. It's not the present now. No longer now, yet to be now, coming to be, passing away, linear sequence. That's temporality. Now, movement, the vague type of existence, is not the motion of something present at hand. Not the movement of thing in space, not the metabolism or the changing thing or the metamorphosis of the thing itself internally. My cells are getting older, I can't see that. It is definable in the terms of the way Dasein stretches along. The specific movement in which Dasein is stretched along. People want the rubber band. You keep stretching, it'll break, or you let it go, it comes back. No. Self-stretching, self-propulsion. Who's doing the stretching? It's being stretched statically, in and for itself, outside of itself. The just pure uncanniness of being in time, but being a human being because we're getting older. So we're flowing linearly, we're accumulating everything. We haven't finished all of our projects. Getting old for the young people, once you get there, is not fun. For those of us that are there, you could say something else, maybe you have a different way. The fourth age of aging, we can rethink how retirement and aging could be different, but it's the issue. The question is not the physical question of aging. I'm talking about the sense of accumulation, yet movement. And what's the relationship between existentially as the deepest question of what the whole nature of that is versus something that's just changing or watching something else move in time. That's what this stretching is. He's going to call that historizing. And here's your definition of historicality. Dasein's historizing, the question of Dasein's connectedness, being towards death, being towards birth, not my birth certificate and not my future death event and the future funeral, if I have one, but the whole nature of how I can even come to some kind of understanding of those things by even knowing that I'm present as a being in this now that's talking. And the connectedness business, historizing, it turns out, is a movement. And here's one definition. To lay bare the structure of historizing and the existential temporal conditions of its possibility signifies that one has achieved an ontological understanding of historicality. So, see, go back to our note 2. I think that's page 31. Not that that's 31, that's 43, but let me just go back to, because you don't hear Geschichtlichkeit as the German word translated in that section 6. You get this historicality here, but you have a discussion about Geschehen as historizing movement stretching along. Is he really talking about history and the historical present? Talking about the individual Dasein? What's going on here? I want to conclude with, I think, our discussion. Deconstruction for Derrida, but this footnote too, because it gives us the sense of what destruction is. We'll see a greater clarification of destruction in the second half of this section, but we'll end here. Let me find that footnote 2. Efficient mode is footnote 1. And yeah, so this last paragraph, and then just a footnote by the translators. Our preparatory interpretation, all this is preparatory to set up the possibility of fundamental ontology, of the fundamental structures of Dasein. Part 1, 2 divisions. Being in the world, care. Division 2, death, temporality, historicality. And then my guy at the end, waiting at the end there, collapsing, as we'll see if we get there ever, Hegel. That's being in time. That's all part of the analytic structure of Dasein, not fundamental ontology, and definitely not an answer to the question of meaning of being. Dasein with regard to the average kind of being which is closest to it, it's not just me, myself, and I, and all my anxiety about just being me in the world. It's so close to me, this possibility of grasping the whole. I better, because no one else is going to do it for me. And quite frankly, probably no one else cares. But you don't care because you ecologically are obsessed with you, not because you're a narcissist. That's not, we're not about narcissists. Bring in the psychoanalysts, because that'll be fun to see how we deal with neurosis, psychoanalysis, neurosis, psychosis, psychopathy, etc. when it comes to the structure of ego. But it's not me. I'm not me. It's really not me. When I'm me, I got to be me, and I got to present myself to whoever I'm talking to. And it's just, but it scares me. It haunts me because the I, as Derrida says later on, can I even die my own death? I got to become the other to even remotely even begin to talk about it. But that then becomes some other person. No, it's me because I'm the one going to do it. But to know when I'm talking about it, so that happens in Aporia when he's interpreting Heidegger in depth. So it's closest to me, but also, as you'll see, that which is the most distant. And deseverance is, we got to make that distance vanish so we can come home, so to speak, to being who we are. If we can get there. Which is close, kind of being which they're for approximately historical as well. Now this is hard. How do we look it up to the historical present? Will make manifest, however, not only that Dasein is inclined to fall back upon its world, the world in which it is. Facticity. I'm already my having been this. I'm already there. Or you can go genealogical as an analog, not because we're doing religion. I'm in the world, but not of it. and I came from the Father, or before his arrest and death. I'm no longer in the world. He's not talking to the disciples. He's doing his silent prayer in Gethsemane. He's still alive. What do you mean he's no longer in the world? Where is he? Oh, give me the existence I had with you before the foundation of the world. It's kind of eerie. That's kind of an ecstatic temporality with that figure. And yet, this atheistic Heidegger anti-Christian project against that is trying to do something else. Hence destruction. What's he talking about? Kind of being in which it is therefore proximately historical as well. However, not only the Dasein is inclined to fall back upon its world and to interpret itself in terms of that world by its reflected light, but also that Dasein simultaneously falls prey to the tradition of which it has more or less explicitly taken hold. Okay, so this is where I'm in. How do the translators deal with this mess? Because they're giving us a translation, then they're going to tell us, hey, this doesn't get it. So that's where we have to talk. I think. What do we feel about this? Footnote 2. Das Dasein has nicht nur der Geneigtheit an seiner Welt, in der es ist zu verfällen und reluzent aus ihrer sich auszulegen. Dasein befällt in eines damit auf seine mehr und minder ausdrücklich begriffenen Tradition. The verb verfällen is one which Heidegger will use many times. This is going to be our conversation. Can't wait. I want to know what you think about this. We shall usually translate it simply as fall. It has the connotation of deteriorating, collapsing, falling down. Neither a fall back upon nor are falls prey to is quite right. But fall upon and fall onto, which are more literal, would also be misleading. For an anzuverfällen, and though falls to the lot of and devolves upon would do well for verfällt with the dative in other contexts, it won't do so here. So what are they saying? Deteriorating, collapsing, falling down, but not falling back upon or falling prey to, even though that's what they said. Quicksand, falling into this tradition, urgency, anxiety. Heidegger, deconstruction is going to come along saying, what is this unicity in this project all about? Question, the fact that you want to pose this thing that this thing exists unquestioned, as does this thing being, which you're going to eventually erase anyway. But this question of historicality, temporality, this modes of temporality with regard to this project of the origin, and the desegmentation that has to do the work against phenomenology, and Derrida will then take us into language. We're not talking about language here per se, but we have all these terms. And then I cheated by giving us section 72. Historizing as an occurrence is a movement of this whole stretch of Dasein. But then weirdly, historicality would be an ontological understanding of that. So I guess one can conclude, I mean, do you feel that, how do I put this? Is Heidegger almost megalomaniacally saying a task has been given, I guess, to him, who then uses this character Dasein to reconstitute the question of the meaning of being? And he wouldn't pose it if he didn't have some will to try to answer it. And that the thing passed down to us, ironically, is the question of the meaning of being. But then what do we got here? The question of the meaning of being is temporality. Time is a horizon for understanding being. I posed this in a talk recently to a group in India. I guess my question to the group here for these texts, and Derrida is great because we can question it. Do you think the West, whatever it is, and those of you that descend from it, why is there an obsession with the question of time? And if you want to bring in some psychoanalysis about the Western Dasein, because that's what he's talking about, where does that anxiety come from? Not in native peoples per se. I mean, there's a whole other way to get into all of this. I would imagine if we end up trying to enter in that space. Well, quite frankly, non-Abrahamic global South context. I mean, you know that you may not have any experience with it, but some of you do. But this is, in many respects, very, very problematic. That there is this obsession in Heidegger, not just because of what's going to happen in 1933 and beyond, but in and of itself for this Western Dasein. And I think Derrida's onto that too. Really Derrida. Okay, I know that was a lot, but do people want to just jump in transcendental historicity? Husserl doesn't bother to put that into question because it's a question of language, or relationship between history and language. Historicity of history. I mean, there's a lot to put out there, but you crazy? I understand being towards death. We're all doing it because we're all alive right now. Being towards birth, what's that all about? Alex, yes.
I mean, if I can psychoanalyze Heidegger and the Western tradition in mass for a moment, we might say that they recognize the inherent instability in living through the world as segments of lines when they recognize the logic of a longer eternity that then reduces them to a simple point of constant finitude. They cannot escape it.
Yeah, but they don't like that. You got to conquer the world.
Hmm.
And a lot of the non-West was colonized, or peoples of color that are oppressed within the West. Nisarga, please. Alex, we're going to come back to that. Eternity
Mhm.
is, they want the eternity. Hey, Nietzsche's eternal return, the last metaphysics. Well, even though he made it about finitude and not just being some eternal absolute structure in metaphysics. Nisarga.
Yeah, so regarding the last question, placed, right, about the Eastern traditions, uh, certainly the Eastern traditions are very concerned with time as well. They have their own concerns with time, the circularity of time. Like, there's a lot of literature on that. I'm not really I don't know how to place it along with Heidegger or read it comparatively, but there's certainly a huge scope for it,
Yes.
for such studies. Yeah, and regarding the possibility of psychoanalytical reading, this anxiety with time, perhaps we may call it anxiety in the Western tradition. Particularly, I was thinking of Heidegger and his use of terms like care and persistence. So persistence, particularly, I was thinking that if I say persistent, if someone is being persistent, there's a there's a substantial degree of uh, uh, resistance against you which you work, and hence you are being called persistent. So there's a degree of resistance, there's a degree of like care also, I would say. uh, you care because there's some difficulty, there's some crisis, and that's evokes care, right? So as much as there's this stretching, even stretching for that matter, there's tension, like there's something working against it. So maybe the very question of time and even the question of being, it comes forward. I won't say it's like obviously there's no individual we are psychoanalyzing here, but as such, the question itself can be psychoanalytically read through in this manner. Like we can read through the terms and read in between the terms in this manner.
Nisarga, that's quite a profound point there, insight into Heidegger. But the first point about, I didn't mean to suggest Global South, Eastern traditions that are not Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian, Islamic, and then the Judeo-Christian Greco-Roman structure of Western Gaza. That there is a profound question. But the interesting thing is that it opens up another horizon, perhaps, for even how we can even structure the architecture of fundamental ontology. It could be totally different. And Derrida couldn't go there himself, to be honest. I mean, he also is a product of this Abrahamic, he'll admit it too, Sephardic, colonized, Algerian, therefore North African, and then inside Europe as a formerly colonized, but then everything in this kind of, that's why he thinks about this onto-theological construction of the Western metaphysical tradition for himself. And very limited exposure to his own Judaic heritage. He'll admit that. So that's the point about that. But the second point there, yes. See, if you take this to philosophy, and we don't have to do that, Heidegger will then quickly go back to Kant and say, what is this I, this unity of the apperception of an I, that stays with me in all my representations? And then the schematic structure of how time operates there. It's very complicated, but I have this manifold. I have some concepts in my head given. How were they put there? But they're there, and then I use them to generate the representations about something. I can never have a pure intuition of either of those categories. I have pure intuitions of space and time, but those aren't things, not material. And I have experiences of things in time. But for Kant, he doesn't question that. Heidegger gets of that in timeness and the unchanging nature of that, which is the substrate and permanence. That's not movement and persistence here. You got it. It's the resistance, the annoying fact of existing is the relationship being in time. It's going to come up. You're going to say, what the heck is this? And at some point, I'm not just going to flow through time unconsciously and not care. You may have to care at some point, especially let's say you have an illness or you get into an accident. Or if you don't, if you're just more existentially minded, you're going to say, look, this is not what my life doesn't mean everything I'm doing in the course of a day. Got to be more than that. That doesn't mean I want to be rich and famous. It just means like, I am somebody. And I like the mosaic example. Moses, you can say, one way to psychoanalyze that, I guess, is that he's not talking to anyone. He's talking about himself. Who am I to go out there and tell the Hebrew slaves, like, you sent me? Before he asks what's his name, and of course he says, I'm who I am. And then the answer to the question is, I am. Who am I? Moses is posing that. And the answer is, I am. And so, okay, I'm going to go do this. And he's the great liberator. But point being is that the persistence of this I is not in time and has a relationship to it. The problem of this as a movement is not simply the movement of a thing or a body in space and time. Therefore, the social sciences can't help us. And it's not about the theological incarnation of the inbreaking event of the eternal into history that can also have a type of movement of kenosis and then redemption, because then it gets into religion and theology. Some people may want to follow it. So the pure facticity of being, but also the transcendental enterprise of having the audacity to say, I'm going to be able to try to answer this. That's huge. It fails, but it's huge. So, and then the resistance you're saying as persistence of the question to the inquirer, not to give up. And you don't want to autobiographically inscribe Heidegger into Dasein and say he's Dasein by saying, because he's saying it's all of us, meaning the human, but then that too can be reduced and bracketed because it's not zoological or anthropological or psychological. We'll get into that. It's not what every other great philosopher said too about the human. So the humanist trouble is a question. What the heck is that? So you got Dasein, which you don't want to translate, but the inquirer. And so we don't spatialize Dasein as present at hand, which is unfortunate to say being there, being here. I'm here in my office, in my home office. That's not what he means. But linked to temporality and locality. And then we got the wholeness of that. that anxiety of this is the hard part because we're always doing being towards death as long as we are in the world. Because definition of death is no one in the world. That hasn't happened yet, but we can't have a picture or content of that. The harder one is wiping away all the ontic registers of birth, photo albums, names, memory, trauma, childhood trauma, displacement, that a lot of psychologists, focus on. That's the psychotherapeutic relationship. So he's not talking about that. And yet Dasein, at least for a guy like Heidegger, who's this eminently Western entity himself, the tradition is the West. And so for Western philosophers, the passage to something else is already buried as a possibility that has to be taken over. But you got to crack, destroy the ice that's frozen over here. Get underneath there. You don't know what you're going to find, but it's also then going to historize out of the future. Speaks to a type of destiny that's not predetermined. And that'll get scary, as you'll see, especially the debates about where's Heidegger really going with this history part, given who he is, what he did, what happened to him, the time he lived. Okay, Robert, I see your hand, please.
Thank you, Rajesh. It's a great discussion. I really appreciate it. So I did my master's on Heidegger back in the 1980s.
Oh, wow.
And have not really. So on the place of ethics in Heidegger's ontology was the title of my master's thesis.
Fantastic! Wow.
And
for you to be thinking about that when everyone says there's no ethics in Heidegger, that's great. They say it now, exactly. Definitely back then.
Certainly. So the concept of care to me is a intrinsically ethical concept, and but it's a very existential form of ethics. Yeah. Do you mind if I just share from section 6 just to focus in on?
Yeah, please. Yeah. So how do I allow you to do that?
So this text, maybe I should make it smaller, but.
Oh, good. You can share. Great.
Can you see that?
No, we can't
sharing?
See. It just says to start screen sharing.
I've got,
but we can't see anything. Oh, I have to give you permission.
Oh. Okay.
Oh yeah. Now we can see it.
I see it on my end, Raj.
Yeah, now we can see it. Yeah. Great.
Right. Oh, great. Okay. So I'm really interested in this phrase that Dasein is its past in the way of its own being, which, to put it roughly, historizes out of its future. It's this out of its future that I'm really intrigued by what he means by this, because he said Dasein is its past, but Dasein historizes out of its future, and it's like there's this tension between facticity and existentiality, and if we say we are our past, it opens up the problem of authenticity, because it gets into this existential problem of, does our past constrain our freedom? So I'll just leave it at that and see if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I want to invite others to build on it, or Alex, you put something on retrocausality. I haven't seen the other chats. And I'll give us something from the ecstatic temporality, section 65, that may illuminate that a bit. But Alex, let's see.
So that ecstatic temporality as the moment of freedom, that was a really profound idea in Heidegger in my reading of him, and so there's this issue, when he says we are our past. Well, not really. We like our past certainly constrains, like we're fallen into our past, but there's this whole problem of authenticity, which again, I see as a really intrinsically ethical question. To be authentic is to confront reality. That's how I see it.
Let's bring up the text again. And I think that was, oh yeah, I think I'll bring up the same text here. So Robert, just to make sure it was this section here, historizes out of its future. And again, I raced ahead to section 72 on historizing as motion, stretchedness, historicality is ontological understanding. So many steps we can take before we get there, but your Zorga, care structure, also the call to conscience, wanting to have a conscience. And there's an ethics there because he's sort of dismantling every simple sense of dogma and obligation, and even Nietzsche's critique of genealogy, of morality, but wanting to just in the silent reticence of wanting to be ready to be prepared. But the traditional Heideggerians are going to say there's a threefold structure mapped to the three ecstasies of temporality. Already in the world that's what we're going to start with, the facticity of just being in the world. Got to start somewhere.
Yes.
I'm not in a black hole, although our universe could be in a black hole. But is it the content in space and time which are canon to it as things in themselves? But at least this idea of the world, being in the world, which means all the baggage that comes with assignments and everything we have to generate meaning, because we have to be concernfully related to other things, people, other Daseins, ourselves. We're in the world, as opposed to not being in the world, which is one definition of death. So the already is sort of like a facticity that is not just the sheer past of the being born, but the fact of it already there even before. I can't get around the back of it to see what was before the before, so to speak, because that's a regress. And then because we've been so focused on being towards death, that's what not only is time going in that direction, it seems, but we're anticipating that because that's what we're capable of anticipating. That anticipation and resolve that's sort of a constant thing, whether we're fleeing it, as he says, or ignoring it, or having fun. I'm not thinking about it. I'm a young person, or I'm obsessed by it. I'm morbidly worried about it. That's not the anticipation either. It's just time is slipping away, and I'm almost done. But when I do think about it, I'm not thinking about it authentically. And then somehow those two guys, having been and coming towards, when they interpenetrate equiprimordially in the future, in the process of having been, the past historizing in the future, that's when I can make present this moment of a vision of maybe some kind of clarity. But it's phenomenologically reduced because it's emptied of any authentic content, because I can't start with being present, because then I'm inauthentically already falling back into destroying, collapsing into other ways to speak and be about it, including myself, what's in me. Like, damn, I better go climb Mount Everest before I die. That's one thing I want to do. That's a noble thing for some people and good for them, but that's not the existential project. Now, the problem is mapping it to this question of historicality and history. Even for Derrida, Foucault does a lot of innovative stuff early and late, but when he, in the order of things, asked about the historicity of history, that all the registers of being in history, the different epochs that we have, the continuities and discontinuities between them, the apperception of what we receive by tradition, our willingness to be fascinated by it, whatever historians do, or the fact that's how we give meaning to ourselves as human beings on this planet. What about the history of rocks or lizards? Humans are, Alex, to your point about the Western Dasein. You want the eternity, you also want that historical meaning. And that's not what Heidegger's talking about. He's not, or Foucault saying that, look, it's the history of the present is kind of this radical disassociation of any past determination of history in the present, but also any present appropriation. So that's why he says, I'm not a historian. Call me whatever you want. But if you think by the history of the present, I mean completely altering and averting any stupid future we might be running into because of the way things are, then yeah, call me that. But so the temporality of the historicity of history is never going to be in history itself. But unlike Derrida and Husserl, we're not dealing with transcendental free idealities and mathematical truths, for example, when they come into existence, or any other kind of truth that persists, like a religious truth. We're talking about the facticity of being in the world and then no longer being in it. So for your point, Robert, if you see this mapping of the past is either not freeing or a type of acceptance, and we can think about that psychologically, that's one thing. But for Heidegger, it's the ecstatic temporality is the meaning of being, is that it is, you can never say it is, because that's back to being present. And then you're prioritizing the present. He just says temporalizing. It's a process, movement. It's the relationality between them. It's almost like hallucinating. I've never taken acid, but just imagine some kind of lived experience of the interpenetration of ontic time, but then I'm using that as a metaphor. Because what you want is that existential version that suggests that past is not behind us and future, like he says here, is not just tomorrow. But it's in their interpenetration that their clearing takes place that allows you to make sense of your being. And honestly, if you do it phenomenologically, which is not what Heidegger's doing strictly, and the example I give is the days I have to drive my daughter to her gymnastics class, the 3-year-old, is a road I have to pass down. It's not the simple road of just leaving my house and the same road I have to leave to get to start going anywhere. That's a repetition that's constant. This is an infrequent repetition. But when it occurs, I get confused, not because I don't know what day it is, but I get that overwhelming, because I love this child, overwhelming feeling when I'm driving past it to go to where I'm going, my work, that it's not the future. She goes on Fridays, like I'm doing this on a Thursday. And it wasn't the memory of last Friday when I took her. You see what I'm getting at? There's an interpenetration that you can't reduce to either a future present or past present, but it's driven by some kind of compulsion to feel that. That's an example. Yeah, please, Robert. Sorry.
Well, if I could comment. So the example that you gave of climbing Mount Everest, it relates to what Heidegger talks about projecting upon possibilities. So you do have a future possibility of climbing Mount Everest, and in imagining that, it becomes a sort of transcendental imagination. And so, in this text that we've been looking, that you just had up, at the bottom of that text, it says Dasein has grown up both into and in a traditional way of interpreting itself, and in terms of this tradition, it understands itself proximally and within a certain range constantly. Now, I just feel that there's such a tension between that sense that we've got our traditional way of interpreting ourselves and the fact that we have to existentially project upon our possibilities. So it's actually not really constant that we have a traditional way of interpreting Dasein, because our freedom is about rebelling against that tradition.
Exactly. To appropriate and take it over as its own, as he'll say. And then even for Derrida, the radicality of, he doesn't use the word destruction per se, but the transcendental historicity is that power of questioning even in the moment of the activation of the sense, that primordial, what he called activation. He's not going to start with any ego or Dasein or subject. That's how the Derrida takes off, which makes, for some of us that like his work, where it's even past this phase in which you have to start with an ego or a subject. Husserl, for sure, this ego problem. How he wants to know the structures of sense that are not psychological, but they're not empirical history either. Transcendental historicity, it's out there. Multiple times Derrida is asking, what is the sense, what is the meaning, what is history, what is language? The possibility of appearing one is the possibility of appearing other. He's going to get into speech and writing. But for Heidegger, for his part, I mean, to bring them in, I think in the next session, when we finish the second half of this section, you're going to really understand what he means by destruction. Here we get this collapsing problem. Is it here or the next section? deteriorating, collapsing, falling down back upon its world, which would also mean the tradition, falling prey to the tradition, but to take hold, you're saying, the freedom. The megalomaniacal view is he linking the project of individual death, dying, and having meaning for ourselves, independent of tradition, family, community, nation state, citizen, religion, race, language, ethnicity, etc., every marker of identity, to radically rebel against that. Gender, um, for someone like him, obviously, if his own innate Dasein is that of a philosophy student, scholar in the making, then he's, as I said, dealing with the history of the fundamental ontology, the question of the meaning of being. The history of the historical inquiry itself is not just his historical present and how they're trying to interpret Aristotle and Plato. Or what are the neo-Kantians doing with regard to making sense of Kant for the needs of their age? What's this Husserl guy doing out of nowhere, breaking from so many different things and introducing this new method for inquiry? But there's a distancing and a need for freedom even from that. And he's wasting away and dying in his own historical present. Hence this radical rupture. But it's the launch of, for the Heideggerians anyway, it's a break, and it's also really the last great attempt in the Western structure at the biggest possible level to rework the question of the meaning of being and offer an architectonic and structure and interpretation to get at it in a different way that's never been done before. But he made it so difficult he couldn't even answer it. And he himself says early on that it's provisional, and there are reasons why he's not going to be able. You'll see by the end of the introduction, like Plato and Aristotle can pose the question and try to answer it, but there are reasons why they could do it. There's something else here. What is that something else that makes it impossible? And if you want to call that failure or perhaps collapsing. But yeah, I think the freedom and resistance question to the tradition is linked to the freedom and resistance question to say you as the individual Dasein are just whoever is going to say is this stretch of time from birth to death and tell you what it means is not really living it out and not being responsible for it, wanting to have a conscience. And this gets really uncanny, but if you're not going to be in time, yet you're going to be finite, and there's a finite temporalization unfolding itself, some movement process, then you're almost on the other side of your own death, looking in to, in a gospel kind of sense, whoever loves this world and is alive in this world is going to be dead in the next, and vice versa. Again, using those parables as examples, not because I want to support Christian proclamation, or Buddhist detachment from any kind of desire, because that leads to suffering. You're not going to get what you want eventually. And the greatest form of suffering is death. So maybe you need to detach yourself from that. What? How do I do that? Well, I don't know what it's like to be a Buddhist, but people try. So point being is that to leave this world while you're in it and to look at this current moment as not who you are, but then be compelled through this propulsion that's stretching itself to that outer sphere, the other side, what's outside the universe, I guess, and see that as the true light or reflection, is then going to state that that entity as a whole has therefore a similar relationship to the thing that it's in, which is its world. And for those of us that care about philosophy and thinking, it's the tradition of philosophy, and those of us kind of in the West, made in the West, that's the tradition we're familiar with. So there is a profound linkage between that, not the individual or the particular, the universal. It's not that. Not subsumption of schematism into a general concept that he's trying to articulate. Hegel's going to come along, you know what he's going to do, and Heidegger's going to misinterpret him. He's going to say, you know what this is all about? This great concept that all the other shapes failed at. And I can expose all the contradictions and the double movements in there because I'm Hegel. It's time. It's not the unity of thought and being, it's the unity of thought and time. And you Western Daseins of all the past have failed. And it's a concept, going back to the problem, Alex. Will the
So if I
truth,
could
will the power, will the time for the Western Dasein? Yes, Alex.
uh,
Oh,
just
Robert, sorry.
to continue on this theme of the meaning of historicality, uh, I'm really interested in how it links into Heidegger's basic idea of care as the meaning of being, because this sense that care is about a a relational ontology, uh, I think is really central to, and the whole question of this chapter about being about the destruction of the history of ontology. There's this tension between destruction and deconstruction in this section, but in deconstructing the history of ontology, you've got this sense that traditional ontology is an ontology of the present at hand, or a a logical um, theoretical ontology, and Heidegger is wanting to say, as historical beings, as being in the world with others, we are intrinsically relational, and it's that relationality that uh, that is central, the relationality of care that's central to uh, our being as historical beings. But then to be that authentically, we have to project upon possibilities in uh, as in an existential um, vision, moment of vision.
I want to, Robert, bring back this section 72, um, when he's defining the historicality and the historizing, because right before that, he kind of repeats again and again. Now, care is the meaning of the being of Dasein. The meaning of the being of Dasein, meaning care, is grounded in temporality. Care is also being towards death. So it's like he's moving around. The equiporative harmonial relation between guilt, conscience, and then reversing the falling authentically, also linked up to the care. So the care itself may be the main character, so to speak, in the whole book, because most people don't focus on the time, and then the movement problem is just the most idiomatic question, according to Heidegger, as Aristotle knew, and Plato, since the beginning of the Western tradition. But there's a great place right where he gets to the historicality. He just says flat out, you know, the meaning of Dazai's being is care. So how do you link it back to the historicality, though? See, if you start with the history of conceptions of time and say, I'm in a linear time, I like clock and calendar time, or maybe I'm in a different time, a native spiritual time, like Mayan kind of calendar, or they're different ways, Hindu, there are different astrological structures of time that can orient people and create meaning. Fine. Um, if you're going to say you're within time and you want to make that a problem, which is part of the reduction, a question even how this linear time even arises for us, not just as the Kantian subject, that's Kant's problem, but take away the subject itself. There as an entity, maybe as a being, does time even have any being, as he asks, which goes back to Aristotle. You can't even talk about history if you don't presuppose time. So now you're at historical time. So then you want to ask about that within historical timeness. You got to care. And when he gets to destruction, as you said, versus deconstruction, both is ways into this type of ethical responsibility. Here's a morbid analogy that just came to mind. But okay, this link between time and history. If you don't want that linear time, and we Western modern people have this irreversible, there's a beginning and it's going to keep going, and we're progressing towards something, either continuous progress. Sounds like we're heading towards eschatologically an end. That's what some psychos out there who are leading the world want. You want to spatialize linear time and make that your historical time framework. But that too has a historizing historicity, if you can put it that way, whose ground is concealed. So I want to get away from any simplistic idea. Derrida says simple narrative sentences from the natural attitude of language are not going to get us to historicity, at least in this early Derrida. And then Heidegger is saying it's not just this thing behind me that's pushing me along. I have to drag it along. It's a lot of baggage I carry from my past, but I'm being towards it as a real reckoning. He's going to say some really strange things about this rapturous pre-birth that you're caught up in. It sounds like the rapture, but he's like, it's a schematic thing that I'm taking up that has its own kind of withering and occurring for me, this thing called the past. And you're like, well, this is going to sound terrible, but it's a way to bring in the care. If we're on an ice block, we're just stuck there. We're standing on it. It's firm enough. It's kind of opaque. There's some water, I guess, underneath it. And, maybe we're trying to do some ice fishing. We're poking at it to get to something. But let's say we're walking along and suddenly there's a clear space where it's a little translucent. It's not iced over, so you can see the liquid. And let's say some other fisherman down the way fell in accidentally, but we didn't know about that. We never saw it. We weren't there. We weren't co-present. And we're moving along and boom, he's trapped underneath there. You got to get the guy out. He has no way. It's like the current's pushing along. So you're breaking it open to go help the dude. See, now we're talking about something that's contorting past and present, something that's occurring, something we need to act. You brought in anxiety, moment of vision, freedom to act, ready and anxious to do it. And this guy is so ambitious, Heidegger. He's doing it for the history of metaphysics. And he is the last. But I'm with you. I like to think with him and people like Derrida, who are accused of being all kinds of things by all kinds of people, it's lacking in care. Is it not the most, isn't it, could it be among, how do we say this? Is it possible to talk about being the most concerned and most responsible, not to turn them into heroes, but in terms of this question of authenticity with regard to the fundamental act of how we question and what we question? And maybe not even as a sense of preservation, but freeing up that poor guy that's still alive.
So
we didn't see die. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you're breaking up a little bit, Rajesh, from my
Okay.
end.
How about you? Yeah, it's internet
But
unstable.
if I could, I was really interested in your mention of clock time, and Heidegger has this beautiful concept that he relates to the whole epistemological framework of the ready to hand versus the present at hand, and that is your example of breaking the ice reminded me of this concept of distantiality.
Mm-hmm.
And what he means by distantiality is that our perception of things is guided by our sense of value. That because we're engaged with something, the nature of time and distance changes for us from that objective scientific clock time
For sure.
into something that's structured by our existence as care.
That's right.
And
Absolutely.
and so our historicality is structured by care because we relate to history in terms of what's important for us.
Right. It's about the nearest and the farthest, the aporia of that, making that distantiality vanish. Severing is separation, right? So to desever is to maybe bring us back, or is it about the homely, as he says with Husserl, like, can the West, it has its uncanny, in the beginning it was already unhomely, uncanny. So to find the home is that angst and that presentation of what you, as he sees in Sanok Hurley, as a breaking apart. So the destruction is not negative at all, and neither is deconstruction. It doesn't link up to synonyms about justice or Marxism. For Derrida, he was, I think, not inauthentically embracing those. In a way, he was kind of pushed to talk about them because people constantly asked him to comment or define it, and he wouldn't define deconstruction. But the care part is not psychological.
So if you go back to
I was just going to say this, the care part is not psychological. It's not subjective, but it has to do with the whole. And the whole includes the entire stretch of life. So you can say if psychology is just a sequence of moments and a product of mind, that this is something more. And yet it's about life. But the life is not, as you said, scientifically measured. It's not zoological or anthropological. So then what is it, especially if you're talking about the historicality, the life of the tradition, and how important it is to us to relate to it? Now, the problem is this question of necessity and destiny, which we haven't even gotten to, as to there is an internal compulsion to do something about this first beginning. And you could say it's the autotheological problem of the Christian West, because the uniqueness, for those of you that may be familiar, is that it's a weird religion. It has a first coming and a second, the parousia, which the early Heidegger was spellbound by, even though he's breaking from his Scholasticism and Catholicism, and was probably an anti-Christ Christian thinker like Nietzsche. Not because they hate it, but not because they want to fulfill the prophecy either. But they're enraptured by this tradition that's encased them, that they're breaking from, as they're anticipating what could be other to it. And Derrida, for his part, without not, of course, being born in it, given his background, but understanding the connections, raised this question too of spirit, as we saw, about the other Christianity. That's already, Heidegger wants to, and the Nazis want to vanquish the spirit. They couldn't. That's his homage to, what survives beyond the event. But also that this term is already imbricated in a type of theology that needs to posit its own overcoming, as Nietzsche said. So the other to Christianity, I don't know, I know that sounds extraneous to what we're talking about, but that's also baked into the tradition for the West, at least Heidegger's West. So the possibility of another care inside the West that isn't predetermined, I think, is the ultimate ethical act, so to speak, the genuineness there. But there's a lot more to say about it. The problem here is that I had to race ahead to take us into movement and temporality as it's being defined in Division 2, being towards birth and being towards death, which is itself a statement about the incompletion of being in time, to therefore foreshadow something beyond being in time, which we could try to accomplish together as we read Derrida. There's another way to go inside being in time, against anything, quite frankly, Trinitarian. The three ecstasies of time, already in the world, racing ahead of possibilities, being alongside others, that's the present. Three ecstasies, three facets that constitute being in the world, dimensions, whatever he calls it. All the primordial structures of the who of Dasein. Well, who is this Dasein at some point? Not just me, myself, and I. Definitely not the they, but its constituent of us, because we can't escape from it. The Das Mann, the they, the authentic they, the talks. Letting go our sense of self, how we talk about ourselves, how we talk with others, etc. And then being with, because it's a with world, distantiality and disseverance. And with other Daseins. We're never going to be able to get into them because we can't take each other's place of death. But he says this in the Death chapter too. Let's just admit we can learn something through the process of mourning, or seeing it, working with the death of the other. Not for ourselves, but just as a relationality, as you said.
And so getting back to this deconstruction problem, the question is, like he's talking in this historicality section about the destruction of the history of ontology, but there are different histories of ontology, and I'm thinking in particular there's like Heidegger sort of frames himself at one level in response to Augustine, but then also against Descartes. And I read Being and Time as in large part, as a deconstruction of Cartesian ontology. And so, like, you've got the issues around solipsism, but it's especially this point that you raised about clock time. Like, for Descartes, clock time is the only time. There, like, anything else is just not real. Like the idea of a deseverant um, time that's different from what is measured by the clock. For the present at hand ontology of Descartes, that's
and
just
Galileo
not
Newton
real.
and those guys too,
Sorry?
and Galileo Newton, the whole age of the 1600s. It was
Well,
the dawning of the
using Descartes
scientific. Yeah, it's the dawning of the
using
scientific
Descartes
conception of time.
as the central philosophical figure of the Newtonian Enlightenment um, theory of reality. So that's the ontology that Heidegger is deconstructing in Being and Time.
Well, we left off, if I recall, here with this deteriorating, collapsing, falling prey to the tradition, which we discussed. When we come back, we have to continue. And as you'll see, it's not just histories and ontologies. He's literally going to tell us, look, here are the big signposts. The Greeks, up to Hegel. Then you got the Middle Ages, scholastic metaphysics. Then he's going to take us to Kant and schematism of time. Excuse me, Descartes' cogito. Descartes' position, as you said. But ultimately, he's going to land back on Aristotle, which he also says in the second division, in the last chapter, that, yeah, this all began with him, and he gave us this flattened thing that has shaped us, which we're going to
Sorry,
question. Oh,
I,
sorry.
I
But time is the counting and the measure of movement, as the number of movement. It's been the thing that was created and handed down and stuck with everybody. And Heidegger's going to question that for the first time. But he says also, that doesn't mean I can't go back and reappropriate Aristotle's paradoxes and aporias in a positively new manner. And all of Being in Time is ending and crashing, deteriorating, collapsing in itself, which is interesting. He's saying it up here. It's going to actually do it. Because when you get to the footnotes of the last chapter in Division 2, he's like, I can't do this right now. Hegel's ether and Aristotle and Plato's metaphysics. And Augustinian anthropology that can bring us back to, the mystery of time. It's not going to be linear space-wise. Clock time, as you're saying. So it's a positive, but it's a positive appropriation. I hate these words, destruction, and even therefore deconstruction. I mean, appropriation, ereignis, event. He's literally going to say that we have to go back and appropriate these guys, but also resist the transmission of how they were taught to us, which frees up the act of reading, which is a phenomenological kind of reduction. But yeah, you get all of that, as we'll see next time, all your histories and ontologies. But what we got to get back to, I'm hoping, is the German. We can play with the German words as you see here in the brackets. Something we're going to get a lot out of this last section, but it ends with Aristotle on time, and then you'll see that this is section 7. So we haven't even finished this section 6, Robert. Everything you just introduced will open up.
That's great. I find the concept of deconstruction really profound because
Good.
I think of the Enlightenment thinkers as very connected to European imperialism, and there's a sense that imperialism had a false ontology that was designed for the conquest of the earth, and that when Heidegger uh, critiques that ontology, which is about like empiricism is a very imperial philosophy because it's about surveying and saying, what can we see in the empire so that we can control and tax it.
I like that linkage. By the way, and yeah, the sovereign and authoritarian nature. Let's go. Maybe we conclude with Derrida, and I think my voice is giving up. It's going to be a really mutilated, I think, recording. But Dasein's being now temporality and historicality, and don't just think of tradition, but don't think of just destruction, but deteriorating, collapsing. Derrida if you want to do the ultimate questioning of the reduction as a motive force, as a type of activation in the encounter of anything, of even ourselves in relationship to our own speech and writing, as a type of text ourselves that's speaking. Or of course, reading about writing and writing about reading and writing over the writing of things. But to link up the possibility of history and the possibility of language, and then this radical critique of the absolute beginning is not out of nothing. It's the most primordial, if you will, thing that's being desedimentized for him, I think, in what Husserl couldn't articulate. Heidegger will say this right after Being in Time. He's going to go back to Kant if we ever get a chance to go that far, but he doesn't say it like arrogantly, but he goes, the job for Kant is for us to understand him better than he understood himself on the schematism problem. Because what's going to haunt Kant is that the time problem it's a secret buried in the art of the soul. Nature's not going to reveal it to itself to us. It's hard, I can't say any more about it. He's picking up on that. Like that's the kind of depths we got to get to. But if you're going to say temporality, historicality, condition, Dasein, and temporality is not linear time, now point, birth certificate, future death date for the individual Dasein, whatever conception of history and historical time you have, the much larger. Then for Derrida, the transcendental historicity, I think he meant it. He goes, before even deconstruction is named, or we even get a greater understanding of what the whole project could look like and what remains to be interpreted by us, is you heard all those etymologies of Geschehen, Geschichtlichkeit, Geschichte, history, Historicität. Geschichtlichkeit is the historicality. English is very poor. It's not going to help us. And so is French in that regard. But historicity, Derrida uses that word because maybe that's all he can have recourse to. And unfortunately, the Stanmore translation turned historicality back into historicity. It's already a word. We already know what it means. It's an adverb. I mean, it's an adjective. I keep getting it confused. Historical is an adjective. But we're talking about movement, a time interrelational movement event. The who question of Dasein is the who question of time, which I come back to as a Western, I wouldn't call it invention. And the Sargo was kind enough to say, look, wait a minute, this is anything that's human being or human civilization has to reckon with this in their own way. But I'm going to argue the deepest motivation inside both thinkers is to get us past the trappings of the three. Physicists can't do that for you. They'll take the three, past, present, future, and attach it to 10 other dimensions of space, matter, and energy. Good for them. I'm not making light here. But have they, like Heidegger would say, bothered to ask, why three? And he goes, all the problems in relativity are not going to help us. Einstein felt it. However radical the revolution that is. Bergson, too, the great insight. And a lot of people give him a lot of credit. To finally make time a spatial matter and give us the complexity of space without psychology. It's almost metaphysical in terms of evolution. That's all haunting. And Heidegger says this in History Concept of Time. Don't go to the inner, like whatever's in us to make us feel anxious about time. And don't go to the outer, the empirical calendar. Or imperial, as you said. Well, I think you said, Robert.
Well, I'm connecting those words. I just see empirical and imperial as really politically and psychologically very close to each other.
Well, I don't know which context you're coming from. Australian?
Yeah, I'm in Australia, and
Oh, good.
so
Great.
like I'm really interested in the indigenous dimension in Heidegger because I was just thinking about this this before, just in this the issue of the presence of the past is a really hot political issue in Australia
Absolutely.
because
And here
because
too.
we because
And the Americans.
Australian indigenous culture 60,000 years old, and the presence of the past is just fundamental to to indigenous identity. But the imperial culture says, "Oh no, the past is not present. The past is past, and you don't need to worry about the past because it's gone." And and that is just incomprehensible to an indigenous mindset. And so we've got this tension in this historicality section in Heidegger about him saying, in some sense, we're determined by our past, and yet as existential beings we are free. But then from an indigenous perspective, the idea that you can be free of the past, that's quite unethical.
Right, but also speak from within and not impose our categories on them. There's another temporalization at work, which opens up a phenomenological enterprise, which you could do for tribals and global South context. Um, Canada has its own issues, and Alex and I know about the American context, which is I'll add more to the government saying the past doesn't exist. They're kind of killing the past and killing people along with it. That's how they started and continue to do. Alex, you know about the Indian Health Services. There's a whole history to be told there about what that's about. That's extended genocide. So I think we should wrap up here, Robert. Thank you for joining the group. Paul, good to see you. Vishal and Shane. The second half of this section gets us into Heidegger literally saying what the other philosophers are doing as the iceberg, but then to chip away to get that translucence and maybe I wouldn't say saving a human being, but that's my metaphor, is this care problem that you're talking about, Robert. Fürsorge, too, which he defines as social welfare, as in that chapter 3 in Division 1, before it becomes this individualistic thing, is that what combines and compels us into community. That's fascinating and important. So this is
Well,
his
wonderful
community.
to meet you, Rajesh. I haven't talked to anybody about Heidegger for about 40 years, so
Well, you have a group of friends now.
so it's really nice
You're
to
back in play here, so that's great.
it's really nice to meet you guys.
Yes, very nice to meet you, and thank you for being here. Thank you all. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.